All right, let's jump right into this explainer and completely dismantle that passive, frankly boring myth of eternity. If you've ever felt a quiet sense of dread at the thought of spending forever doing absolutely nothing, trust me, you are not alone. Today, we're going to systematically look at the incredibly vivid, concrete details actually found in the biblical text to uncover what is a truly hyper-physical afterlife.
So, I want you to picture this. You wake up. There are no alarms going off, no notifications buzzing, absolutely no meetings you're late for. You wake up in a vividly real, profoundly solid city without a single trace of anxiety or exhaustion. You step into an eternal existence that looks absolutely nothing like that endless church service or the floating on soft clouds that you were probably taught about. You literally have nowhere you have to be, and yet you feel completely 100% alive.
Now, what's wild about this is that the popular image, the clouds, the harps, the aimless floating around in a white robe, actually comes from medieval paintings and modern greeting cards. It doesn't come from the text itself. For centuries, we've kind of just coasted on these assumptions nobody really bothered to check. But when we actually look at the source material, we find highly specific, almost uncomfortably concrete details describing a fully physical, redeemed Earth. So yeah, no harps required.
To see this clearly, let's go right to the crucifixion. When Jesus promised the thief on the cross that they'd be together in paradise, he wasn't talking about floating in the sky. He used the Greek word paradiso. That's a word that quietly destroys the whole ethereal realm picture because it literally translates to a highly tactile physical park or garden. He was essentially saying, hey, today you'll be with me in the Garden of Eden.
And this perfectly sets up the overarching direction of the entire biblical narrative. In Revelation 21, the grand vision of eternity doesn't open with a bunch of people floating upward into the sky. No, it opens with the holy city coming down out of heaven from God. The direction here is absolutely crucial. The story doesn't end with our evacuation into some invisible realm. It ends with heaven physically arriving and descending down to us.
So the takeaway here is that God uses active, tactile words. We're talking about building, planting, and dwelling. As we see over in Isaiah 65, these aren't just pretty metaphors for sitting still. These are literal descriptions of real, dynamic activity. The curse of futile, sweat-inducing toil is totally lifted, but the joy of good, meaningful work, that remains.
Section 1. The upgraded resurrection body.
Okay, so what kind of body are you actually going to inhabit to do all of this building and planting? I think we've been so afraid of sounding quote-unquote unspiritual that we just default to expecting a ghost-like existence. But the Apostle Paul totally shatters that idea in 1 Corinthians 15. He explains that our new bodies will be like a plant bursting from a seed. Think about it. A fully grown oak tree is just the massively upgraded version of a buried acorn, right? You maintain that same continuous identity, but you become a vastly more physical, radiant version of yourself.
And if you think this is just poetic symbolism, just look at the post-resurrection accounts. After conquering death, Jesus possessed a glorified body, one that could suddenly appear in locked rooms and casually walk through walls. Yet to prove to his friends he wasn't a ghost, he explicitly asked for and ate a piece of real, physical, broiled fish. It was basically the ultimate beach barbecue. He had flesh and bones. The physical world doesn't get thrown in the trash, it gets redeemed.
Because of this, we really have to recalibrate our vocabulary. When the text talks about a spiritual body, being spiritual in this context doesn't mean becoming an ethereal, floating mist. It actually means becoming a physical body, completely animated and empowered by the Spirit of God. You are fully alive and finally free from the slow unraveling of death and decay.
Section 2. A day in eternity.
Now that we've wrapped our heads around the physical environment and our upgraded bodies, let's actually map out what a literal day might look like. Because remember, the question isn't how do I pass the time, it's what do I get to do today? You won't be doing nothing. Your morning might kick off with deep relational connection at the banquet table, eating incredibly rich food with heroes of the faith and your loved ones, totally free from any pretense or fractured connections. Then, around midday, you move into perfect, sweat-free work, building and creating. And since God is infinite, your afternoon could be an adventure of learning that never ever hits a ceiling.
And then there's the responsibility aspect. Check this out. In the parable of the minas from Luke 19, a faithful servant is literally given charge over 10 cities. 10! This proves that faithful servants don't just retire to a hammock in the kingdom. They get promoted. You're going to be given real governance, real responsibility, and real work that matches the character you've forged in this life.
And you know what makes this endless unfolding of days so absolutely perfect? It's how we experience God. Worship isn't some scheduled church service you attend once a week. God's presence saturates every single conversation, every meal, and every project you work on. It's exactly like sunlight filling a room without having to ask permission. His presence literally becomes the very atmosphere you breathe while you work and govern.
Section 3. Redeeming Human Culture.
All right, this brings us to a concept that genuinely surprises most people. We tend to assume that everything made by human hands just eventually burns up and disappears. But the scriptures explicitly state in Revelation and Isaiah that the glory, honor, and creative output of humanity are actually brought into the eternal city. That means your art, the music you write, human architecture, craftsmanship, even a business you built with true integrity, they aren't just temporary practice. Somehow, the creative work you're doing right now has a permanent place in what God is ultimately building.
Now, you might be wondering, well, what about all those biblical references to the earth burning? When Peter writes about the earth being consumed by fire, and John writes about God making all things new, they aren't contradicting each other. They're describing a purification process. It's a lot like a controlled forest fire that clears away the dead, corrupted growth. The fire burns away the decay so that what God originally called very good is completely restored and remains. It's not a total replacement, it's a profound restoration.
Section 4. Training for Tomorrow. Understanding this is a massive, explosive paradigm shift that drastically changes how we have to live today. Think about it. If you hold to a theology of escape, this life is essentially just a disposable waiting room. You're just trying to survive it. But if you grasp the biblical theology of renewal, you view the earth as a creation that is actively being restored. You realize you aren't just packing your bags to leave this world, you are actively being prepared to stay in a renewed one.
Because this physical eternity is the true reality. The Apostle Paul makes this incredible conclusion at the end of 1 Corinthians 15, your labor is not in vain. The skills you build in those quiet and visible moments, the integrity you maintain when it actually costs you something, and the unseen creativity you pour out today, it all absolutely counts. It goes somewhere. None of it simply evaporates at death.
Since eternity isn't just a really long nap at the end of a hard life, but rather a dynamic promotion into your true purpose, we have to look at our daily lives through a totally different lens. You're in training right now. So, the ultimate question this explainer leaves us with is this. What kind of person are you becoming today, and what will God be able to trust you with forever? Keep that in the back of your mind as you go about your work this week. Thanks so much for exploring this with us.